Good morning. What if I could tell you that just one or two quotes per character in an Inspector course will teach you pretty much what the whole of the play is about? In fact, quotations are used a great deal when GCSE English students, year 10s, year 11s, do their assessments at the end of the year, or the exams at the end of the year, are desperately memorizing quotes from all of their literature to try and use in their answers to a question in their GCSE English exams. But quotations are more than just a technique that can be used to validate evidence about your opinion about what Priestley or what Shakespeare or whatever else is doing in literature. Now, I'm just going to focus on an Inspector course as an example, but everything I do with an Inspector course is transferable to all the other texts you have to learn in literature, from Dickens to Shakespeare, and even to poetry anthologies, because anthologies are also another narrative of approach that teaches us about life through poetry. So let's have a look at what we can do. So when we look at quotes and read the quotes, they actually tell us quite a lot. So I'm just going to share the screen and get it on now, because I think that what we need to do is have a look at some particular quotes. So this is from my GCSE revision guide, which you'll be able to purchase after this particular video. But look, if I look at Arthur Birling, you've got straight away very great sort of detail about this particular man. When he's doing this, he's saying, I'm talking as a hard-headed, practical man of business. So he's already giving us an idea about his personality at the very beginning. And we get more and more quotes all the way through that tell us more and more about who he was and what he was doing and what his purpose was and what his ambition was in terms of this story. You know, he kind of is a bit of a social climber, and here he says, I gather there's a very good chance of a knighthood. So he's actually looking for status. He's looking for all these type of things. But look at the way one of the quotes tells us about what he thinks about himself, and kind of shows us that he doesn't really have much time for anybody but himself. And this is the quote here. So if you remember this one, this tells you a lot. A man has to make his own way, has to look after himself. And then if you notice at the end, he says, and his family too, of course. So when we're looking at things like that, we're getting some input into his character straight away. And it's really important that if we read these quotes, if we read every quote that's quoted about Arthur Birling, it will tell you about him for the whole play. So let's just move on straight away to his wife, Sybil. Look at that as a starting quote. Girls of that class. Well, if I asked you, well, what does that mean? I'm sure you could answer me. If you're studying in Inspector Goule's, you know very well that girls of that class is referring to Eva Smith. And it shows that status is more important than the person. And girls of that class is very derogatory. And there's also some very important quotes. Go and look when there's one element here where the Inspector Goole is obviously interrogating Mrs. Birling. Let me just put that. I'm just going to highlight that so I can leave it there. Right. So go and look at for the father of the child. It's his responsibility. At this point of the play, we are discovering that Eva Smith was carrying a child. What is unknown to Mrs. Birling at this point is that Eric, her son, is the father. And yet she says this. So there's a very strong irony about her being very derogatory about Eva Smith, and even more derogatory about the man who's created what she would see this condition that Eva Smith is in. So straight away, when we look at these things, we're finding a great deal about the whole of the story. And that is something that is really, really important. And we can carry on through the other main ones. Look, we get here an indication of how Sheila behaved at the beginning. Yes, go on, mummy. So she talks almost like a spoilt girl and her mummy, and she can get what she wants, etc., etc. But later on, she's completely changing by the way her parents are behaving, where she says, "It frightens me the way you talk." So when we're looking at quotations, much that they have context in answering the questions, what we're really trying to do is show the purpose of what quotations can actually do when we're actually looking at an inspector course. So my advice is this: if you are doing any of these literature plays like Inspector Goole, Blood Brothers, or you're doing Shakespeare or whatever, go through and build a quote bank that tells you about the character, and it can be related to the themes. For instance, if I just pick off the top of my head a question in an Inspector Goole, which would probably say something like, how does Priestley present selfishness in an Inspector Goole? And you know straight away that selfishness applies to every single main member of that family. So it could start with Arthur Birling, Sybil Birling, Sheila Birling, Eric Birling, and Gerald Croft. And Eva Smith doesn't really come into that at that point. She's the victim of selfishness. And she, you know, we could, I suppose, look at some of the quotes she's made, but she works hard, etc., etc. So this is a groundbreaking approach to what you can do with your revision. Try to be more focused. Learn those quotes. Look, if you were an actor in a play, you'd have to learn the whole of the script that you're speaking in the play. So learning a few quotes is not going to be overly difficult. So make sure that you now go back into your revision books or whatever you're using. And obviously, if you need help with quotes, the book I've done, the Inspector Course, on this video is available for you to purchase as well. And that will help you. But start using quotes to up your game. It'll help you master your full and utter understanding of an Inspector Course. All the plots, the whatever happens, the theme, social responsibility, the lack of the status symbols, the way there was a gender difference between men and women, and Arthur Birling, an archetypal sort of chauvinist who wants to be in charge of everything, and everybody, he stands up at the beginning of the play when everybody's sitting down. So all of these things come into play. But the more you understand about the play, the more you'll understand why Priestley did it. But look, these characters in Inspector Goole are people that, if you learn the characters well, they're very relatable. You might have come across somebody like Sybil Birling. You might have come across some bombastic man like Arthur Birling. You might have come across some young person like Sheila Birling, who's a little bit sport, a bit privileged, and doesn't really think about anybody else until it is brought to her about a tragedy of a girl of a similar age. So all of these things should help you really start to understand how to negotiate this revision that you're trying to do. But quotes are important. And as I said, if you learn the quotes and you sort of define every single quote, what you think the quote means and what it's referring to, it literally tells you the whole story of an Inspector Course. Anyway, I hope this was of some help to you, and do it now. And click and subscribe to my videos if you want any more information like this that will give you tips, give you strategies, and give you ideas about how to revise and how to ace your exams. Good luck.